Eli Turner had lived alone on his ranch for so many years that most people in town hardly remembered what he looked like. They only knew he was tall, quiet, and always paid for what he bought without saying more than a few words. He preferred silence over long talks, long rides over crowded rooms, and the wide-open sky over anything built by many hands. His ranch sat miles away from the main road, a place where the wind had full freedom to move, and the nearest neighbor lived far enough that Eli could go weeks without seeing another face. That evening, after finishing his chores, he decided to check his cattle near the creek. The sun had already dropped behind the hills, leaving the land painted with soft orange light. It was the kind of evening Eli liked the most, when the world was calm and the only sound came from the slow movement of animals settling for the night. He expected nothing unusual, but as he walked near the rocky part of the creek, he saw something out of place, something small, dark, and still lying in the tall grass. At first he thought it was a lost calf. Calves often wandered off, and he had pulled more than a few out of the creek over the years. But when he stepped closer, he realized it was not an animal at all. It was a girl young, thin, and dressed in clothing he quickly recognized as belonging to a Comanche family. She lay curled on her side, breathing shallowly. Her hair was covered in dust, and her face looked tired and faint. Eli's heart tightened. In this part of the land, misunderstandings were common. Settlers feared tribes, and tribes feared settlers. Finding someone from a Comanche family on his land was enough to bring trouble if the situation went wrong. But Eli did not think about conflict at that moment. All he saw was a young girl who needed help badly. He knelt beside her and spoke softly, unsure if she understood English. "Hey, can you hear me?" She blinked a little, trying to lift her head, but her body was too weak. He could tell she had been wandering for many hours, maybe even days. Her clothing was torn in places, and her arm looked swollen, as if she had fallen or hurt it while trying to escape something. He knew he could not leave her here. Even if he rode to town right now, she would not survive the cold night. He had only one choice. Moving slowly so he did not startle her, he slipped his arms under her and lifted her gently. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless compared to the heavy tools he carried every day. As he walked back to his cabin, she leaned weakly against him, not fully awake but trusting his support because she had no strength left to resist. The cabin stood near a small rise overlooking the fields. It was simple. A wooden table, 2 chairs, an old stove, and a spare room with a small bed he rarely used. Most of the furniture had been built by his own hands over the years. When he reached the cabin, he pushed the door open with his shoulder and carried the girl inside. He laid her carefully on the bed in the spare room, then lit a lamp so he could see her better. Her face was peaceful now that she was lying down, but she looked exhausted. Eli filled a cup with water, helped her drink a little, and then checked the injury on her arm. It looked like a bad fall rather than anything else. He cleaned the area as gently as he could and wrapped it in clean cloth. She winced a little, but did not pull away. When he stepped back, she looked at him with half-open eyes, as if trying to understand who he was. "You're safe here," Eli said in a low voice, hoping she could sense his calm tone, even if she didn't know the words. "Just rest. Rest." She tried to speak, but the only sound that came out was a whisper too soft to understand. He placed a blanket over her and made sure she was warm before returning to the main room. He did not sit down right away. Instead, he stood by the door, looking outside at the quiet night. He knew helping her might bring complications. If her family came searching and saw her in the home of a lone rancher, they might assume the worst. But Eli had never been the kind of man who stepped away from someone in need. Life had taught him many hard lessons, yet it never erased his sense of what was right. And right now, leaving that girl outside had not even been an option. He lit the stove and warmed a small bowl of broth, then went back to her room. She had drifted into sleep, her breathing deeper than before. Still, he placed the bowl nearby, in case she woke and needed it. After that, he pulled a chair next to the bed. He did not know why he sat there, maybe to keep watch, maybe because sitting alone in the other room felt too far. Hours passed quietly. The only sound was the soft crackling of the stove and the slow breathing of the girl. Eli's eyes grew heavy, but he refused to fall asleep. He wanted to be awake in case she needed anything, or in case someone came looking for her in the night. Instead of sleeping, he found himself thinking about things he had not thought about in years. His life had once been filled with warm voices, shared meals, and laughter. But after losing his family, everything had gone still. He had accepted loneliness as something permanent, something he deserved. Yet now, sitting beside a wounded stranger, he felt a tiny shift inside him, something like purpose, returning to a quiet life. Near midnight, the girl stirred. Eli leaned closer. She whispered a name, barely audible. Asha. He understood then. That was her name. She opened her eyes for a brief moment, as if to check whether he was still there. When she saw him, she relaxed again and closed her eyes. "You're going to be all right, Asha," he said softly. "You're safe." The night grew colder, but the cabin stayed warm. Eli did not move from his chair except to refill water or add wood to the stove. Every now and then, he stepped outside to look at the moonlit land, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. He saw nothing. The land was still, untouched, peaceful, for now. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, the girl was resting more comfortably. Eli finally let himself breathe a little easier. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know where she came from exactly or whether her people were close. But he knew one thing clearly. Whatever tomorrow brought, he had done the right thing by helping her. And no matter how quiet or lonely his life usually was, he was not the kind of man who walked past someone in need. The sun rose slowly, touching the land with soft gold. Eli stood by the window and watched the morning unfold. The world looked peaceful again. But he sensed that this peaceful moment would not last long. Someone would come looking for the girl. Someone would ask why she was here. Someone would want answers. But for now, in the small cabin on the quiet ranch, there was only a wounded girl resting safely, and a lone rancher who had made a choice guided by kindness, not fear. The morning sun slipped into the cabin slowly, filling the small room with quiet warmth. Eli Turner had barely slept, but he felt strangely clear-minded. When he checked on the girl, she was awake, though still weak. She looked around the room carefully, as if trying to understand where she was. Her eyes rested on Eli for a moment, and he saw no fear this time, only exhaustion mixed with curiosity. He brought her a cup of warm water and helped her sit up slightly. She drank slowly, her hands trembling a little. When she finished, she touched her chest gently and said in a soft voice, "Asha." Eli nodded, understanding that she was telling him her name again. This time, clearly. He pointed to himself and said, "Eli." Asha repeated his name a little awkwardly, the way someone might speak a language they did not often use. Her injured arm still troubled her. Eli checked the cloth he had wrapped around it the night before. It was holding fine, but she winced when she tried to move it. He told her, with simple words and gestures, not to use that arm yet. She nodded, trusting him without question. It surprised Eli how calmly she accepted his help. Maybe she was too tired to resist, or maybe she sensed that he meant no harm. He warmed a small bowl of broth and brought it to her. She sniffed it with interest and took small sips, finishing almost all of it. When she leaned back onto the pillow, her face showed relief. It was clear she had not eaten properly in days. As the morning passed, Asha gathered enough strength to speak short sentences. Her English was limited, but she tried her best to communicate. She told him she had been traveling with a small group from her tribe when they were separated. She did not go into much detail about how it happened, and Eli did not press her for more. The important thing was that she had survived long enough to find safety on his ranch. Eli decided to let her rest a little while he checked on the animals outside. Before leaving the room, he pointed to the blanket and made a simple gesture for her to stay in bed. Asha nodded again, her eyes following him until he stepped out of the cabin. Outside, the air was crisp and cool. Eli moved through his chores, with practiced efficiency, feeding the horses, checking the cattle, repairing a loose fence rail. But his mind was not on his work today. It kept drifting back to the girl resting inside the cabin. He had taken care of injured animals, lost children, and even travelers caught in bad storms before. But this situation felt different. It felt heavier somehow, as if the calm he had always relied on was shifting beneath his feet. By midday, he finished his chores and returned to the cabin. Asha was sitting up now, looking around with quiet interest. She noticed a wooden carving on the shelf, a small horse Eli had carved years ago. When she pointed at it, her expression brightened a little. Eli picked it up and handed it to her. She smiled for the first time since he had found her, running her fingers across the smooth wooden surface as if she could feel the care that had gone into shaping it. Asha spent the afternoon resting, but she insisted on helping with small tasks once she felt a little stronger. When Eli tried to stop her from getting up, she shook her head politely and pointed to the water bucket. She was trying to show that she did not want to be a burden. After a moment of hesitation, Eli allowed her to help in small ways that did not require much strength. She carried light items, arranged tools on the table, and even tried to sweep the floor with one hand. Eli watched her quietly. She moved with grace even in her weakened state, and though she rarely spoke, her expression said more than her words ever could. Each time she finished a task, she looked at him as if asking whether she had done it correctly. He nodded each time, offering a small smile. The cabin felt different now. Less empty, more alive. Later in the afternoon, Asha stood by the window and looked out across the open fields. Her face softened with a mixture of longing and sadness. Eli walked over, trying to understand what she saw. She pointed toward the far hills and said, "My people." It was clear she missed them and worried about whether they were safe or searching for her. Eli touched his chest lightly and said, "You stay until strong." Asha looked at him and nodded with deep gratitude. She knew she had no strength to travel on her own yet, and the world outside still felt uncertain. As evening approached, Eli prepared a simple meal: bread, beans, and warm tea. He set the table and guided Asha to the seat across from him. They ate in comfortable silence. Sometimes Asha would look at him curiously, as if trying to understand the man who had quietly taken her into his home. Eli, in turn, noticed little things about her. The way she softened her footsteps out of respect, the careful way she handled objects, the gentle way she spoke even when her words were few. After dinner, Asha tried to help clean the dishes, but Eli gestured for her to rest. She insisted for a moment but eventually agreed when she noticed fatigue creeping into her body. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching Eli move around the cabin. The soft glow of the oil lamp made the room feel warm and safe. As the sky darkened, Asha pointed to her injured arm again and said, "Better." Eli checked it and saw the swelling had gone down slightly. He reapplied fresh cloth, making sure it was comfortable. Asha watched his hands work quietly, as if memorizing the kindness in each motion. When he finished, she spoke very softly. "Thank you." The words were simple, but the feeling behind them was deep. Eli nodded, unsure how to respond, because showing care had always been easier for him than talking about it. Night settled around the cabin, calm and silent. Asha lay down to rest, but her eyes stayed open for a long time. Eli could tell her mind was busy. He understood. She had lost her group, wandered alone, and then woken up in a stranger's cabin. Even though he had been gentle, she must still feel uncertain about the future. Before blowing out the lamp, he said in a quiet voice, "You're safe here." Asha turned her head slightly, and he could see her relax a little. The simple reassurance meant more to her than any long explanation. After she drifted into sleep, Eli sat by the window again, thinking about the path ahead. He knew that Asha's people, if they were anywhere nearby, would search for her. And he knew that if they found her on his land, they might not understand the situation at first glance. Fear and tension between settlers and tribes were strong in these parts. Even a small misunderstanding could grow into something neither side wanted. But Eli had made his choice. He would protect Asha until she was strong enough to return home. That was the right thing, no matter the risks. And deep down, he felt something else, something he had not felt in many years. The presence of another person in his quiet home made him feel less alone. It was as if a small window had opened somewhere in his heart. The fire in the stove burned low as Eli finally allowed his eyes to close. Outside, the land was peaceful, but he sensed change coming. He could not say when or how, but he knew the calm would not last forever. Though, the cabin held two souls connected by simple kindness and quiet trust, and that was enough to carry them through another night. Part 3. The next few days passed quietly on the ranch. But Eli Turner could feel a change in the air. It was the kind of feeling that grew slowly, like a quiet whisper in the back of his mind. He did not know whether it came from worry, experience, or simple intuition, but it kept him alert. Even while doing normal chores, feeding the horses, fixing a broken fence rail, checking the cattle, he stayed aware of every sound around him. Inside the cabin, Asha continued to grow stronger. Her color returned, her steps grew steadier, and her voice carried more confidence. She still used only simple English, but each day she spoke a little more. Eli noticed that she listened carefully to every word he said, as if she wanted to remember them. Sometimes she repeated phrases quietly to herself, practicing until they sounded right. Every morning, she helped with small tasks. She collected eggs from the chickens, picked herbs near the cabin, and folded blankets neatly. Her movements were careful but graceful, and even the smallest task she completed with sincerity. Eli never asked her to help. He thought she needed rest, but she insisted with a gentle nod and a smile that said she wanted to contribute, not simply sit and wait for her strength to return. Despite her calm presence, Eli could see worry hiding deep inside her eyes. Whenever she looked out the window, her face softened with longing. Her gaze traveled to the hills far beyond his land, as if searching for familiar shapes or signals. Eli understood what she felt. She missed her people, her home, her family. She had been strong and patient, but hope and fear lived together in her heart. One morning, Asha stood at the doorway and pointed toward the ridge in the distance. "Smoke," she said quietly. Eli stepped outside and narrowed his eyes. There were thin lines of smoke rising far away, so faint that someone unfamiliar with the land might miss them. But Eli knew the land well, and he knew that smoke signals were sometimes used by travelers, hunters, or tribal families. Asha looked troubled, but not scared. Her eyes showed recognition, yet she stayed silent for a moment. "My people," she whispered. "They search." Eli felt a small weight settle in his chest. He had known this day would come. It was only natural that her people would search for her, and they would follow any sign that might lead them close. Still, something about the situation made him more alert. Helping Asha had been the right thing, but her people might not immediately understand that he meant no harm. He walked around the ranch land that morning, scanning for any unusual signs. He found fresh footprints near the creek. Light ones, not deep, probably from people walking with care. He also saw a piece of dry grass bent in a way that showed someone had stepped there recently. His horses were uneasy, moving their ears toward the north side of the ranch as if they sensed something. When Eli returned to the cabin, Asha was sitting at the table, her fingers resting on the wooden carving of the small horse he had given her. She looked anxious, but calm. "They close," she said, her voice steady but quiet. Eli pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "They may come here," he said slowly, choosing simple words so she could understand. "I will talk. I will explain." Asha shook her head gently. She understood Eli's good intentions, but she also understood her people better than he did. "They worry," she said. "They think bad." She struggled to find a safe word. "They think something wrong happened." Eli leaned back, resting his hands on the table. He had seen misunderstandings before. Sometimes fear caused people to jump to conclusions. Still, he believed there was a way to show them the truth. "We will show them you are safe," he said. Asha looked at him with deep trust. She nodded slowly. "I speak. I tell." She tapped her chest softly and whispered, "I tell them Eli good." Her voice was faint, but sincere. The day moved slowly after that. Asha stayed close to the cabin, watching the hills with quiet eyes. Eli continued his chores, but he checked the horizon more often than usual. The land felt different today too, still, too quiet, as if waiting for something. By late afternoon, Asha helped him prepare a simple meal. She moved with calm focus, but Eli noticed her shoulders tense each time she glanced outside. When they sat down to eat, neither spoke much. Their thoughts traveled beyond the cabin, beyond the fields, into the unknown paths where her people might be walking. After dinner, Asha stood by the window, the fading light casting a soft glow on her face. She spoke suddenly, surprising Eli. "I scared," she admitted in a small voice. "Not of you. Of what they think." She placed her hand over her heart, trying to explain the mix of emotions she carried. "They protect. They strong. They fear for me." Eli stepped closer. "They will see you safe," he said gently. "They will see the truth." Her eyes softened. "I hope," she whispered. As night approached, the sense of tension grew stronger. Eli could feel it in the wind, in the way the horses shifted restlessly, and in the quiet that settled across the ranch. He kept the oil lamp low, not wanting to draw attention but also not wanting the cabin to feel dark or unfriendly. Asha sat near the corner of the room, sewing a small tear in her clothing with careful hands. She seemed calm, but Eli could tell she was listening closely to every sound outside. When a branch snapped somewhere on the far end of the ranch, she stiffened. Eli stepped to the door and looked out, but he saw nothing unusual in the dim light. Later, when Asha prepared to rest, Eli noticed she had placed the wooden carving beside her pillow, as if it brought her comfort. She whispered something in her own language, a soft, gentle sound that reminded him of prayers. Then she lay down and closed her eyes, though her breathing showed she was not fully relaxed. Eli sat by the window again, watching the moon rise. His thoughts drifted back to a time when his life had been full, when he had not eaten alone, when laughter filled the cabin, when he had believed mornings would always bring hope. Those days were gone now, but having Asha here reminded him of the warmth he once knew. It felt strange, but not unwelcome. Hours passed, slow and silent. The land outside seemed to hold its breath. Eli stood up now and then, to check the doors, the windows, the yard. He was not expecting trouble, but he was preparing for misunderstanding. He knew that people sometimes acted quickly when emotions were strong. Just before dawn, Asha woke from a light sleep. She sat up, her eyes wide and alert. Eli turned toward her, sensing her sudden fear. "What is it?" he asked softly. Asha pointed out the window, her voice trembling but clear. Eli stepped outside, and in the faint glow of the rising sun, he saw movement. Shadows at first, then Shapes. A group of riders, still distant, but approaching slowly and steadily, their silhouettes growing larger as they neared the ranch. Asha joined him at the doorway. She stood close, but slightly behind him. Her expression, a mixture of relief and worry. "My people," she whispered. Eli nodded. "We will stay calm," he said. "We show them everything is all right." Asha looked at him with trust that warmed his heart more than he expected. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I speak," she repeated. "I tell truth." Eli rested his hand gently on the doorframe and watched the riders approach. The moment he had been expecting, yet quietly fearing, had finally arrived. The calm days had ended. Something larger was now unfolding on the ranch. Something neither he nor Asha could avoid. But they stood there, together, side by side, waiting for whatever dawn would bring. The first light of dawn spread gently across the land, turning the fields silver and gold. Eli Turner stood just outside the cabin, his boots planted firmly on the small wooden step. Beside him, Asha stood quietly, holding the wooden carving he had given her. Her fingers wrapped around it, like it was a piece of strength she needed for this moment. Together, they watched the distant figures grow clearer as they rode closer. The riders moved in a wide, steady line, forming a shape that looked almost like a moving wall against the early morning sky. There were many of them, far more than Eli had seen in these parts at one time. 50 riders. Maybe more. Their horses moved with practiced control, their formation tight and purposeful. Even from far away, Eli could see that they were not approaching casually. They were coming with intention, with concern, with urgency. Asha's breath caught in her throat. She pressed the wooden carving to her chest. Eli looked at her gently. "It will be all right," he said in a calm voice. She nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the approaching riders. She knew her people, and she knew how strongly they protected their own. They had likely been searching for her for days, fearing the worst. Seeing her on the land of a lone rancher would bring questions, maybe even suspicion. Eli took a slow breath. He did not prepare weapons. He did not run inside or hide. Instead, he kept his hands relaxed at his sides, showing no fear, no threat, no anger. He wanted the first thing they saw to be calm. He wanted them to understand. The riders reached the outer fence of his land and slowed. Dust rose behind them as they came to a stop. For a moment, the scene was still. The horses breathed heavily, their sides rising and falling in the cool morning air. The warriors sat tall, their faces serious and unreadable. Asha stepped a little closer to Eli, her shoulder brushing his arm. He gave her a small nod, a silent reassurance that he would not let anything happen to her. After a few long seconds, one of the riders, the oldest among them, with calm eyes and a steady posture, moved forward. This man was clearly the leader. He stopped only a few steps away from Eli. The air between them held a heavy quiet. Finally, the leader spoke. "Where is the girl?" His voice was deep, controlled, and filled with unspoken concern. Asha started to step forward, but Eli gently lifted a hand to guide her to wait just a breath longer. He wanted to speak first, to set the tone. "She's safe," he said simply. "She's right here." Asha then stepped out from behind him, her posture straight but her nerves clear in her eyes. The warriors' faces changed the moment they saw her. Relief, shock, worry, all mixed together. Several of them leaned forward in their saddles, as if they needed to see her clearly to believe she was real. Asha lifted her good hand slowly and greeted them in her own language. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she continued speaking. The leader listened carefully, his stern expression softening as she explained everything: how she had been lost, how Eli had found her, how he had taken care of her and kept her safe. She pointed to the cloth wrapped around her arm, explaining that he had helped her when she needed it most. A long moment followed. The leader turned his gaze back to Eli, studying him. The rancher stood calmly, his eyes steady. There was no fear in his face, only quiet sincerity. Eli knew how misunderstandings could grow quickly, so he made sure his voice stayed calm when he spoke again. "I only helped her," he said. "Anyone would have." The leader considered his words carefully. Behind him, the other warriors remained silent, waiting for his decision. Asha stepped closer to the leader and repeated the same message with growing clarity. Eli had protected her, not harmed her. He had treated her with respect, not with fear. She spoke with a soft determination that made even the sternest warriors listen. Slowly, the leader dismounted from his horse. The other warriors did not move but watched closely. The leader approached Asha first, checking her arm gently. Her injury was healing well, and she stood strong. Relief spread across his face like a quiet sunrise, soft, warm, unmistakable. After making sure she was truly safe, the leader turned toward Eli. For a long moment, neither spoke. The land around them stayed silent, except for the distant breathing of horses and the soft wind moving through the grass. Then, the leader spoke, his tone quieter now. "You helped her when she was alone. That is something we do not forget easily." Eli nodded once. "She needed someone. I was here. That's all." The leader studied him again, as if trying to understand the kind of man who would help someone outside his own world without expecting anything in return. Then, he reached into a small pouch tied to his belt and pulled out a woven token. It was made of strong thread, shaped into a simple symbol, something that carried meaning among his people. He held it out to Eli. Asha gasped softly. She knew what that symbol meant. It was a rare sign of thanks, given only to those who had earned sincere respect. Eli hesitated for a moment, not out of fear, but out of humility. He was not used to receiving kindness, much less something so meaningful. But the leader kept holding the token out, waiting for him to take it. So Eli reached forward and accepted it with a quiet nod. After that, the leader signaled to Asha. She took a small step forward, then looked back at Eli. Her eyes shone with emotion, gratitude, and something deeper. A quiet connection formed through days of trust and kindness. "I go home," she whispered softly. "I safe because of you." Eli felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "I'm glad you're going home," he said. "You're strong now." Asha smiled gently, the kind of smile that stayed in a person's memory for a long time. She touched the wooden carving one last time, then extended it toward Eli. But he shook his head slowly. "Keep it," he said. "A reminder you were safe here." Her eyes softened even more. She held the carving close, then turned and walked toward the group of riders. They made room for her, welcoming her back with visible relief. As she mounted one of the horses, she turned back one more time. She raised her hand, in a simple, sincere gesture of farewell. Eli raised his hand back, the morning sun lighting his face with gentle warmth. The group of riders began to move away, slowly at first, then with smooth confidence. Dust lifted softly around them as they rode across the land. Asha looked back only once more before the distance grew too large. Eli stood there until they disappeared over the far ridge, until the silence of the ranch returned again. He walked back toward the cabin with slow, thoughtful steps. The day was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet he had known before. Something in the air had changed. Something inside him had changed as well. Kindness had brought two worlds together for a moment. And even though Asha was gone, a small warmth remained with him, something he had not felt in many years. A reminder that even a solitary life could still touch another, and be touched in return. When the riders finally disappeared over the far ridge, the land around Eli Turner fell quiet again. The dust they had stirred slowly settled back onto the dry earth, and the morning sun continued to rise calmly across the open fields, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But Eli stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty horizon. It felt strange to see the ranch so still after witnessing such a large group of riders only minutes before. His heart was steady, yet he sensed a quiet echo inside him, something like a memory forming even though the moment had only just passed. He slowly turned back toward the cabin, walking with steady steps. The sound of his boots on the dry ground felt louder than usual. Each step reminded him that the world had returned to its ordinary rhythm. But he had not returned to the man he had been before Asha arrived. Something inside him had shifted in ways he did not fully understand yet. When he stepped into the cabin, the place felt different. It was the same simple space, his wooden table, the old stove, the small bed in the spare room. But the air carried the memory of Asha's presence. Her quiet breathing, her soft voice practicing English words, the sound of her careful footsteps. All of them seemed to linger in the empty spaces of the cabin. Eli walked to the spare room and paused at the doorway. The bed was neatly made, the blanket folded just as Asha had left it before stepping outside earlier that morning. She had always taken care to keep things tidy, even when she was still gaining her strength. He noticed the small indentation on the pillow where her head had rested for many nights. He also noticed the missing wooden carving. She had taken it with her, something that made him quietly glad. He stepped back into the main room and sat at the table. For a while, he simply looked around, absorbing the stillness. The life he had lived before Asha came had always been this quiet. But now, the silence felt heavier, fuller, not painful, just different. He ran his thumb over the woven token the leader had given him. Its threads were strong and carefully tied, the design simple yet meaningful. It was not something given lightly. He turned it over in his hand, thinking about the trust it represented not just from the leader, but from the entire group that had ridden onto his land. He placed the token on the table and looked out the window. The fields stretched far into the distance, calm and familiar. The cattle moved slowly near the creek, the horses grazed in the pasture, and the gentle wind brushed through the tall grass. The land had always been his companion, his comfort, his responsibility. But for the first time in years, he realized that someone had passed through his quiet life and carried a part of it with them. The day unfolded slowly. Eli completed his chores the same way he always did, but each task carried small reminders of the days when Asha had been there helping him. When he collected the eggs, he remembered how she had held the small basket with both hands, carefully balancing it as if the eggs were treasures. When he gave the horses water, he remembered how she had run her fingers along one horse's mane, smiling softly at its gentle nature. When he fixed a loose fence rail, he remembered how she had stood beside him, handing him small nails with her uninjured hand. Every memory came quietly, like soft touches on his thoughts. None of them hurt. Instead, they warmed him with a feeling he had not known for a long time: connection. Around noon, Eli returned to the cabin for a simple meal. He sat at the table with his plate, but he found himself glancing instinctively at the seat across from him, the one Asha had used. She always sat with her back straight, her hands neatly folded before touching her food. And she always gave a small, thankful nod before eating. Eli smiled gently at the memory, then shook his head softly, almost amused at how easy it had been for her habits to settle in his mind. After lunch, he stepped outside and walked toward the ridge behind the cabin, a place where the land opened wide enough that he could see far into the distance. This had always been one of his quiet spots, a place he came when his thoughts grew too heavy. Today, he needed that space. He reached the high edge of the ridge and sat on a smooth, flat rock. From there, he could see almost every corner of his land. The distant mountains looked hazy under the sunlight, and the long grasses shimmered softly. Eli rested his elbows on his knees and let out a long breath. He wondered where Asha and her people were now. how far they had traveled, what they said to each other once they were out of sight. He hoped she was comfortable, that the group had welcomed her back warmly, that she would find peace after such a difficult journey. He imagined her holding the wooden carving, perhaps showing it to her family, explaining what it meant to her. He found comfort in that thought. Time passed gently as he sat on the ridge. Birds flew overhead, and small insects moved through the grass at his feet. The land was alive, even in stillness. It reminded him that life continued with or without big events, and that even moments of fear or worry could settle back into peace. When the sun dipped lower in the sky, Eli finally rose and walked back to the cabin. The warmth of the day had softened, and a cooler breeze rolled across the land. Evening shadows stretched long behind him, and for a moment he imagined another set of footsteps beside his smaller, lighter, a shadow that would have matched Aisha's quiet pace. He shook the image away gently, not to erase it, but to place it in a safe corner of his memory. Inside the cabin, he lit the oil lamp and set it on the table. The warm glow filled the room, chasing away the early evening dimness. Eli sat down again and reached for the woven token. He ran his fingers across the threads, thinking about what it represented. It was more than gratitude. It was acknowledgement. It meant that someone had seen his kindness, understood it, and valued it. For a man who had spent years believing that his life held little meaning beyond quiet survival, this simple symbol reminded him that his choices still mattered, not just to himself, but to others. He placed the token carefully on a small wooden shelf near the window. It seemed like the right place for it, where the morning light would touch it every day. As night settled in, Eli prepared for bed. He moved slowly through the cabin, extinguishing the lamp and making sure everything was in order. When he entered his own room, he paused. For the first time in years, he did not feel the usual heaviness that often settled in his chest at the end of the day. Instead, he felt a quiet peace, a soft, steady calm that came from knowing he had helped someone when they needed it most. He lay down, and as he closed his eyes, his last thoughts drifted to Asha. Not with worry, but with gentle hope. He imagined her safe among her people, recovering fully, laughing again one day, telling the story of the stranger who had shown her kindness at the edge of a quiet ranch. Eli smiled faintly in the dark. The world outside might always be large and unpredictable, but one simple truth remained. Helping someone had brought a new kind of warmth into his quiet life. And though he would continue living alone for now, his heart carried a small, steady light he had not felt in many years. A light that would stay with him every dawn, every sunset, every calm night, long after the riders had gone, and long after Aisha had returned home.